Emily Blunt, John Krasinski, the hot Hollywood power couple, have teamed up together to make the new thriller, A Quiet Place. I've seen it, and I'm going to let you know what I think about it on this very first episode of Movie Shit. Movie Shit. The basic story here is that we are presented with an alternate reality in which humans are hunted by creatures who use echolocation to find their victims. And the movie basically follows this family's struggle to survive in the midst of that after the loss of their son. First, I'm going to talk about the things that I really liked, and there's a lot of that. The first thing I loved was the use of sound in general, except for one thing, which I'll talk about later, but particularly the use of silence to build suspense. This is something that a lot of thrillers attempt to do, but often fail to pull off in a graceful way. Here, the use of sound is really restrained, and it pays off in spades when things start to get loud. I also really appreciate the way that they distinguished the sound from the perspective of the daughter's character, who is deaf, from the rest of the family who can hear. When we're looking at the movie through the perspective of one of the hearing members of the family, you hear room sound, atmosphere, environmental noises. And then when we switch to the daughter's perspective, everything is silent. And it's a fairly subtle shift, but super effective in the context of this overarching silence. There's some really excellent tracking shots, especially near the beginning of the movie, that do a really great job at enforcing perspective. Just these long, sort of horizontal movements, slow and steady, that, pan across this trail that cuts through this thick wooded forest. It gives you a sense of pacing, and also is just really kind of striking to look at. Good camera work by John Krasinski, who directed the movie. I also really enjoy that nothing is explained for the most part. There's a scene where you can see some newspapers that give you a very brief rundown of events that may have happened, that led up to this whole reality. But for the most part, they just allow you to live in the present moment with this family. And really, that's what's important, because it's really about just the experience of feeling this dread and this, urgent need to survive and stay quiet. And we don't need a big backstory or a big explanation to feel that. It'd be wasted and unnecessary. For the same reason, I also appreciate that they decided not to rely too heavily on flashbacks. There's a couple thrown in there, but they're tasteful and well-placed, and they work. But like I said, for the most part, we're just allowed to sort of sit in the terrifying reality of this family's life. There are a couple really sweet scenes with the kids, played by Millicent Simmons and Noah Jupe. I can't remember having seen them in anything in the past, but they're both very capable. There's a really tender scene between John Krasinski, who plays the father, and Noah Jupe, who plays the son. They hike up to a waterfall where they're allowed to talk and express themselves vocally, because the sound of the water rushing overpowers the sound of their voices, and therefore they can't be detected by these mutant creatures. And so John Krasinski and his son have this lovely moment where they yell at the top of their lungs and let it all out. And it's just a very tender moment between father and son that I think sells really well. They both play it with earnestness and tenderness, and it's really nice. There's another dramatic scene featuring Millicent Simmons, the daughter. She's given a hearing aid by her father. Her father works on them constantly, trying to make one that'll work from the, sort of scarce parts that they're able to find and put together. And anyway, she's just become sort of defeated at this point, because every time he tries to make an adjustment or make it better, it never works. But he gives it to her anyway. She's in her room, and she sort of hopelessly tries on this hearing aid, And of course it doesn't work, and she just breaks down alone silently in her room, and it's really heart-wrenching. She plays those emotions beautifully, especially for how young she is. It's exceptional work. The creatures, the mutant creatures in this movie are really fucking scary. Particularly their face, which it's like their head splits open, and you can see their ears or whatever their cochlear organs are, and they're revealed within the sort of fleshy guts of this head as it splits open. It's really fucking unnerving. They also showed us just enough of the creatures that we didn't become desensitized to their power. Emily Blunt brings the fucking heat, brings the business as Evelyn, the mother of the family. She is fantastic. She's particularly fantastic during these really tense moments where she's forced to remain silent while a creature is feet away from her and her newborn child begins to cry. She just embodies terror, motherly terror. Cannot praise her performance highly enough in this film. She is pooping on it. Most importantly, they did a really excellent job of nailing the feeling of suspense. When things start to get fucked up, it's very difficult to look away. John Krasinski's direction with this kind of stuff is really efficient. He knows where to look, where to point the camera, and for how long. He doesn't overstay his welcome. He gets out of the way of the action, and it's really good work in terms of directing those moments of suspense. Now I'm going to talk about the things that I didn't particularly like. There isn't much exposition, which, as I said, I think is a good thing, but where it fails and sort of betrays its purpose is in trying to make us feel a little more than we should about the loss of their youngest son. We see the son being taken from them by one of the creatures very early on in the movie. We have no time to connect to the kid, and therefore we don't really feel all that much for him, or at least I didn't. And there are a couple of sort of schmaltzy, sugary scenes where they're mourning the loss of this son, and it doesn't really work as well as I think they wanted it to. Particularly, there's a scene where John Krasinski is sitting on top of this grain silo, sort of longingly looking at these pictures and artifacts, and burning them and looking off into the distance, and it's just a little much. It's a little much. To compound that issue, some of the score work in the first half, particularly when it's paired with these overly emotional scenes, can be a little forceful. Just these little lingering piano notes that just feel out of place. Like there's a lot of silence in the film. Just let us sit with that grief. Maybe it would feel more organic, But instead they try to direct us a little too much with the score, which I don't think works very well. I want to make it clear that later on, the sound is great and really serves the action. So I don't want to knock the sound entirely, just sort of in the first half. To continue on the topic of sound, I felt like some of the Foley work when these characters are moving about this quiet space, I feel like some of those sounds are too muted. And I'm almost positive this was intentional because it's like it's done a lot. But objects and things that should be making more sound aren't. Footsteps, moving objects on a table. You feel like these things should be making more sound than they are, almost as if someone threw a blanket over them and then recorded. The scene at the end where John Krasinski's character sacrifices himself for his children is a little bit much. Part of it is because he stands there in front of his children and says "I love you" to them in sign language before going "Rah!" and making noise so that the creature will come to him and take him instead of his kids. But it's a little much. And this brings me to my biggest gripe with the movie, which is that I just have a hard time divorcing John Krasinski from Jim from The Office. It's not his fault, you know, because John Krasinski really delivers a committed performance. It's good. It's maybe a little overly emotional at times, but outside of that, the main problem is that Jim as a character is so indelibly a part of John Krasinski for me that it's very, very hard to separate the two and see him as an entirely different person in an entirely different world. Maybe that's just my bias. Maybe that's just because of the hours and hours I've spent watching John Krasinski as Jim, but it's just the way it is, and I wish it wasn't. I almost wish he had chosen to cast someone else in his place. Even though he did a very good job, I just had a hard time not seeing Jim. So, in conclusion, tight direction, excellent suspense building, great use of sound, and some really wonderful performances make this film very much worth your time. Aside from some instances of trying to pull on the heartstrings a little too much and the unfortunate reality of having to watch Jim from The Office deal with mutant creatures, it's a very solid movie. The bottom line is that they really succeeded at making you feel suspense and terror. And that's what the movie was trying to do, and it worked. Good job, A Quiet Place. I'm going to give this 14 out of 20. 15 and above, I feel like, is classic range. This is not quite there, but it was a really good movie for what it was, and I appreciate the work of everyone who was involved in the making of it. Let me know what you think about this movie review. Did you think I went on too long? Did I ramble? Are you tired of hearing me talk? Would you like me to do more things in this format? I love watching movies. I can see as many of them as I want because I have Movie Pass, and so I just really enjoy thinking about them and talking about them. But if you don't, I won't bother you with this anymore. Let me know what you think in the comments. We can also talk about the movie. Leave your opinions, suggestions, anything. I want to hear from you. You know I love each and every one of you. Thanks for being here. Thanks for watching. Keep pooping on it, and I'll see you soon. Bye.